Hello, it's Concord Wind. We're going to be reading once again A Genuine Love for God is Spontaneous. Spontaneous? I don't know how to say that word. And the Word, Volume 1. So let's get to reading. God says, when people contact God with their hearts, when their hearts are able to turn to Him entirely, this is the first step in man's love for God. If you want to love God, you must first be able to turn your heart to Him. What is turning your heart to God? It is when everything that you pursue in your heart is for the sake of loving and gaining God. This shows that you have completely turned your heart to God. Aside from God and His words, there is almost nothing else in your heart: family, wealth, husband, wife, children, etc. Even if there is, such things cannot occupy your heart, and you do not think of your future prospects, but only pursue loving God. At such time, you have completely turned your heart to God. Suppose you are still making plans for yourself in your heart and are always pursuing personal profit, always thinking, when can I make a small request of God? When will my family become wealthy? How can I get some nice clothing? If you are living in that state, it shows that your heart has not fully turned to God. If you only have God's words in your heart, and you are able to pray to God and become close to Him at all times, as if He is very close to you, as if God is within you and you are within Him. If you are in that kind of state, it means that your heart is in the presence of God. If you pray to God and eat and drink of His words every day, are always thinking of the work of the church, and if you show consideration for God's will, use your heart to love Him genuinely and satisfy His heart, then your heart will belong to God. If your heart is occupied by a number of other things, then it is still occupied by Satan and it has not truly turned to God. When someone's heart is truly turned to God, they'll have genuine, spontaneous love for Him and will be able to consider God's work. Although they still may have moments of foolishness and unreasonableness, they show concern for the interests of the house of God, His work, and their own change in disposition, and their heart is in the right place. Some people are always claiming that everything they do is for the church, when in fact, they are working to benefit themselves. People like this have the wrong kind of intention. They are crooked and deceitful, and most of the things they do are for their own personal benefit. This kind of person does not pursue love of God. Their hearts still belong to Satan and cannot turn toward God. Thus, God has no way of obtaining this kind of person. Can you feel God's concern for man in these words? You know, he tells you plainly, clearly, just as God told Adam and Eve, of every tree of the garden you may freely eat, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat you shall surely die. Very clear, very plain, very ordinary words, very plain and clear words, words that show deep concern for man. And these words are very similar because it's the same God who spoke these words. And these words, God is telling you very clearly, very plainly, that if you have the wrong intentions, if what you do, and in life, if what is in your heart is not God but other things, and if you work for God for your own benefit instead of to protect the interests of the house of God, to carry out God's will on earth as it is in heaven, if you have any other intentions besides those, God has no way of obtaining you. And so you have to change your intentions. I mean, do you see God is, He has so much love in His heart. His love is so vast and so real. And, I just think He's so precious, the way He cares for us. I really do. I really think, and not only because of the way He cares for us, but and shows concern for us, but he's the only one who does, like, I mean, because if you think about it, I mean, like for example, my family loves me, but they don't show the concern for me that God does. They don't show the concern for my salvation. Like they show concern for my fleshly well-being, They don't show concern for my spiritual well-being. And when they do show concern for my spiritual well-being, um, they believe that, this book is wrong. They believe this book is wrong. And, it's just very unfortunate because it means that they're opposed to God. They don't realize they're opposed to God. They believe in God. They love God. But they deny his second incarnation, and so, humans just are not a substitute for God. You may have loved ones, you may have people you care about deeply, but they're not a substitute for God. God cares so much more about us than what humans are even capable of achieving, because the greatest love that humans can have for one another is the love humans have for God, being considerate of his will, and therefore seeing God's love for mankind and loving mankind because of the love God has for mankind. And that's the greatest love that a person can have for other people. And even that love is nothing compared to the love of God, because people, will reject other people based on the principles of God's words. And, God will continue to work on a person until they give up on themselves or until they die. But God tells us who to accept and who to reject. So our rejection of certain people, isn't just baseless actions. It's there's a foundation in God's words, for why we reject certain people, which I haven't had many opportunities to reject people. But I have a discerning heart, and I see, like, nobody in my neighborhood is really a gospel target. There's this one old lady that might be a gospel target, and I've thought about maybe trying to get the word to her, but other than that, everybody else, they've listened to my songs. They've said almost nothing about the songs I've released. They've showed no interest in my sermons. They've showed no interest in my channel. They'll listen to a song I send them, and they might not even listen to the whole thing and say either nothing, or they'll say, yeah, that's great, that's awesome, whatever. And very few words, and they don't have an understanding of the lyrics. They don't share their understanding. They just don't seem interested. And God tells us, if somebody's not interested in the truth, don't force them to into the church. If somebody doesn't gladly accept the truth, if someone doesn't happily join the church. Don't force them to join the church, because you have to be excited to join the church, to join. You have to be excited to accept the truth, to join the church, and it's just a principle of not forcing people, because God never forces himself on people, There's consequences for rejecting God, but consequences and forcing somebody are not the same thing. Pressuring somebody to join the church by texting them, calling them, talking to them every single day, begging and pleading with them, just being very persistent and constant with them when they're clearly not interested. And eventually they're like, fine, just to get you to shut up, I'll join. And then they join. And that's forceful. God doesn't do that. What God does is he asks somebody if they want to join the church, if they're interested in the truth. They say no. He says, okay, well, I hope you find what you're looking for in life. And then he turns away from them, never to speak to them again. And, when they die, I don't know what happens after they die, but surely there are consequences, and that's how God handles it. He lets them live their life, and they have opportunity after opportunity during their life to accept the truth. And if they reject the truth their whole lives, at the end of their life, then there's consequences. There's a price to pay for rejecting the truth. There's a price to pay for accepting the truth. There's a price to pay for everything. That nothing is truly free, And the price that you pay, by the way, for accepting the truth is not a price that benefits God. God doesn't profit off of the price you pay to gain the truth. The price that you pay to gain the truth is a price of sacrifice, because you have to sacrifice your old disposition, the things that you used to love and used to worship and used to admire and hold reverence for in your heart, and things that were the idols of your heart that you held near and dear to your heart, the things that occupied your heart in the past, you have to let go of those things, and that process of letting those things go can be very painful, and that's the price. And it's not that God is trying to profit off of people. That's not the case at all. It's that people have to pay a price because they have to be cleansed of their corruption. And so they have to let go of the idols in their heart. And so that's the price. And it's painful to let go of the idols of your heart. It is very painful, When I had to let go of my worship of women, and when I believed I was a woman, when I was transgender, and I worshipped myself because I believed I was a woman. I grew my hair out long and believed I had superpowers, and I was just mentally ill. I was really out there in left field. And it was hard to accept that I was a man. That I'm still, of course I was born a boy. I grew up to be a man, and I'm a male. There's nothing that can change that. It's God's arrangement. God arranged for me to be male. And thank God he arranged for me to be male. Now I'm thankful I'm male, but it was hard to accept that I was male. When I first was, you know, taking medication, and I had to let go of my adventures. I had to let go of my mental illness and the entertainment that came from my hallucinations. And that was hard, letting go of all that, letting go of abnormality, because it's not just corruption we have to let go of. We have to let go of as much abnormality as possible. Some defects in humanity, we can't change. But there are some abnormalities in humanity that can be changed. You can get on medication for a lot of abnormalities in humanity. And so that if you can do that, if your abnormalities can be treated with medication, then absolutely you should get treated. I mean, there's no excuse, because the medicine actually works. And if you find something else that works, like if a keto diet works for you, it's much slower. But if a keto diet is able to treat your mental illness, I mean, I tried the keto diet and it didn't do anything for my mental illness. But if it works for you, then you have to stay consistent. Though it has to be something you can afford to do. Something that, don't live outside of your means. If you can't afford to do it, just get on medication. If you've got insurance, if you don't have insurance, please get insurance. And this is just for people who have mental illness. If any people with mental illness watch, my whatever, my TikTok, my YouTube, my Rumble. So, anyways, yeah, love God for who he is. Love God because he's the one who's always there for mankind. He's the one, like, all God thinks about is mankind. Like, in his thoughts revolve around mankind, just as the earth revolves around the sun. God's thoughts just revolve around mankind. And if the Creator, the righteous and holy one, if all he thinks about is mankind, then mankind, who is created by God and owes God their lives, should think about God all the time and love him as much. Well, I mean, I guess mankind can't love God as much as God loves them, but I think mankind should definitely love God sincerely from the bottom of their heart, because of his righteousness, his holiness, the fact that he's there for mankind, the fact that he can do work on mankind, And he does do work on mankind. Every arrangement in your life is an arrangement of God. It's like that new song I released, no heart is better than God's. And in time, you'll see that the hand on your life is a hand that's divine. And that's very true. So anyways, amen. All right. God bless. Thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.